Maybe it started the winter my knees began to ache on the stairs, or maybe it started long before that and I simply refused to see it. At 63, I'd learned that some truths sit quietly in the corner of a marriage for decades, waiting for you to be ready. I wasn't ready. Not for a long time. I ran a small translation consultancy out of our home in Oakville, mostly legal documents, sometimes medical files when a hospital in Mississauga needed something done carefully and quickly. My husband of 31 years never asked what I worked on. He asked what was for dinner. He asked whether I'd called the snow removal company. He asked whether the accountant had sent the quarterly remittance. He did not ask about the language that lived inside my head like a second heartbeat, because 30 years ago, when I told him I'd spent my junior year of university in Seoul on an exchange program through Queens, he had laughed and said, "That's adorable, you'll never use it up here." So I stopped mentioning it. And when you stop mentioning something for long enough, it becomes a secret whether you intended it to or not. His name was Gordon. He was 67, a partner at a mid-sized commercial real estate firm with offices on Bay Street. And for the past 6 years, he'd been pushing into the cross-Pacific investment market, which meant more and more of his clients were coming out of Seoul, Busan, and occasionally Incheon. He prided himself on his Korean. He'd taken evening classes at the University of Toronto Continuing Studies program, then hired a private tutor, and he liked to drop phrases at dinner parties the way some men drop the names of wines they can't pronounce. His accent was terrible, his grammar was worse, but he had enough swagger to carry it. And in the Toronto business world, swagger is half the battle. I never corrected him. In the early years I'd tried, once, gently, and he'd gone silent for the rest of the evening and slept in the guest room. I was 34 then, and still thought marriage was something you tended like a garden, so I apologized. I apologized for knowing something he didn't. And after that, I kept my Korean folded away in a drawer I didn't open in front of him. Our daughter Elise was 30 now, living in Vancouver, married to a lovely man who worked at a forestry consultancy. She'd asked me once, when she was about 12, why I never spoke Korean around Dad. I remember standing at the kitchen sink, looking out at the maple in our backyard, and telling her, "Your father likes to be the one who knows things." She'd nodded like she understood. Children understand more than we give them credit for. The invitation came on a Tuesday in late October. Gordon walked into the kitchen while I was grading a translation a junior colleague had sent over, dropped his briefcase on the island, and said, "I need you at a dinner Friday night, downtown. The Shangri-La." I looked up. In 31 years he had invited me to exactly 4 of his client dinners. The last one had been in 2014. "It's a big one," he said, pouring himself a glass of the Niagara Riesling we kept in the fridge. "Mr. Park and his wife are flying in from Seoul. He's running point on a portfolio deal, industrial properties up near Pearson. 400 million if it closes. His wife wanted to meet the wives. Cultural thing. I see. Wear the green dress. The one with the sleeves. And for God's sake, don't try to speak Korean. I'll do all the talking. You just smile and look like a nice Canadian housewife. Nod when I nod. Laugh when I laugh. Easy." I almost laughed then. It bubbled up in my throat and I pressed my lips together until it passed. "I'll do my best, dear." "Good girl." He kissed the top of my head the way you might pat a dog and walked out of the kitchen with his wine. I sat very still for a long time. Then I went upstairs and pulled the green dress out of the closet and laid it on the bed and stared at it. I thought about the drawer where I'd kept my Korean folded for 3 decades. I thought about how tired I was. I thought about how the mortgage on the Oakville house was almost paid off, but there were second properties in our name that Gordon managed through a numbered Ontario corporation, and I had signed papers about those without reading them carefully, because the accountant had said everything was fine. I thought about Gordon's secretary, Brianna, 28 years old, who had called our house 3 times in the past year asking for Gordon in a voice that was a little too casual. I thought about a lot of things that evening. Friday arrived cold and bright, the kind of late October day where the light comes in at a low angle and makes everything look sharper than it is. I had my hair done at a salon on Lakeshore, not because Gordon asked, but because I wanted to look at the woman in the mirror and recognize her. The stylist, a Korean-Canadian woman named Yuna, whom I'd known for years, chatted with me in Korean while she worked. She knew. She was one of maybe 4 people in my life who knew. At one point, she said to me, in that soft, careful Seoul accent, You look like someone who's made a decision. I said, in Korean, I think I have. She didn't ask what. She just nodded and kept working. Gordon picked me up at 6. He was already wearing his confidence like cologne. On the drive into the city, he briefed me the way a coach briefs a bench warmer. Mr. Park was old school, 69 years old, second-generation money, Cheeble adjacent. His wife, Mrs. Park, was 58, a former art dealer who now sat on the board of a museum foundation in Seoul. They valued family. They valued discretion. They valued long marriages and stable homes, which is why Gordon said, glancing at me at a red light on University, "You are an asset tonight. Look at us. 31 years. Picture of stability. The old man will eat it up." I smiled at him. "I'll do my part. That's all I ask." The restaurant was on the lobby level of the Shangri-La, one of those places where the lighting is engineered to make everyone look 5 years younger and 2 drinks happier. Mr. and Mrs. Park were already seated when we arrived. Mr. Park stood and shook Gordon's hand with a small bow that Gordon returned too deeply, a rookie mistake. Mrs. Park's eyes moved over me in that way older Korean women have, of assessing a stranger in about 4 seconds. She took in my dress, my earrings, the set of my shoulders, and something in her face softened, just slightly. I bowed to her the way I'd been taught 37 years ago, the correct depth for a woman meeting an elder she respects. I felt Gordon stiffen beside me. I straightened up and smiled at him like I didn't know what I'd done. We sat. Gordon ordered drinks for the table with the air of a man in command. The appetizers came. Conversation began in English, polite and cautious, the kind of small talk that happens when 2 cultures are still feeling each other out. Mrs. Park asked me about Elise. I told her about our daughter's life in Vancouver, about her husband, about how we'd visited in August. Mrs. Park asked if we had grandchildren yet. I said not yet, but we were hopeful. She smiled a small, knowing smile. "Patience," she said. "Children come when they're ready." Then, perhaps 20 minutes in, Mr. Park turned to Gordon and said, "In Korean, shall we speak more comfortably? My English is tiring me tonight." Gordon's eyes brightened. This was his moment. Of course, he said in his heavy, clumsy Korean. "Please. I apologize in advance for my poor Korean." Mr. Park waved this off politely. Mrs. Park turned to me and said, "In English, I hope you don't mind, dear. The men will discuss their business. We will sit and be bored together." "Not at all," I said. I picked up my water glass. I took a small sip. I let my face go pleasantly blank, the way I'd practiced in the mirror that afternoon. And then the conversation shifted entirely into Korean, and I listened, and I understood every word. For the first 10 minutes it was mostly business. Industrial zoning near the airport, vacancy rates, a parcel in Brampton that had come onto the market. Gordon's Korean was exactly as bad as I remembered. He mangled honorifics. He used informal verb endings with a man 20 years his senior. Mr. Park was too polite to correct him, but I saw the small muscle tighten at the corner of his jaw each time Gordon did it. Mrs. Park, beside me, picked at her salad and asked me, in English, about my garden. I told her about the tomatoes I grew every summer. She told me about the balcony plants she kept in her apartment in Seoul. And underneath our pleasant little conversation, the men's voices rolled on in Korean, and I caught every word. It was Mr. Park who shifted the tone. He said casually, in the way older Korean businessmen sometimes do, "You've been married a long time. 31 years, your wife mentioned. That is a significant accomplishment. In Korea, we say a long marriage is a kind of wealth." Gordon laughed. It was the laugh I'd heard 1,000 times. It was the laugh he used when he was about to say something he thought was clever. I felt my stomach tighten before he even opened his mouth. "Wealth," he said in his terrible Korean. "Yes. Well, let's just say the accounting on that particular investment is more complicated than it looks." Mr. Park tilted his head. He did not smile. Gordon pushed on, oblivious. "Between you and me, Mr. Park, a man in my position needs more than one ledger, if you understand me. My wife, she is a good woman, but she is not a young woman. There are other arrangements I maintain. You understand how it is." Mr. Park's face did not move. His silence was a Korean silence, which is a different kind of silence than a Canadian silence. A Canadian silence waits to be filled. A Korean silence is already full. Gordon filled it anyway. I have a young woman at the office. She's 28. Brianna. Very understanding, very discreet. My wife doesn't know, of course. She doesn't need to know. She has her little translation hobby and her garden, and she's comfortable. And as for the money, well, I've moved most of the holdings into a structure she can't touch. The Oakville house is in her name, yes, but the rest, the commercial properties, the offshore accounts in the Caymans, the shares, those are all in the numbered company. She signed off on it years ago. She didn't read the papers. She never reads the papers. He chuckled. He actually chuckled. When this deal closes, I'll have enough to simply move on. Quietly. Brianna and I have been talking about a place in Palm Springs. My wife can keep the house. She won't even know I'm gone for a week. I kept my face still. My hand did not shake when I lifted my water glass. Mrs. Park was telling me about the jasmine she grew on her balcony. I said, "That must smell beautiful in the evenings." She said, "It does." My husband says it reminds him of his grandmother's house. Across the table, in Korean, Gordon said, "So, Mr. Park, if we can structure this deal to route the commissions through an offshore entity, I can assure you everyone at the table walks away very happy." And then Mr. Park spoke, slowly, quietly, in Korean. He said, "You have told me a great deal tonight, Mr. Lindstrom. Only what is useful to our partnership," Gordon said, grinning. "Yes," Mr. Park said. "I see." I felt Mrs. Park's hand touch mine, very briefly, under the table. I turned to her. Her eyes were on her husband, but her hand was on mine, and I understood, in that moment, that she had heard the entire conversation too, and that she'd been watching me the whole time, and that she had known, from the beginning, that I had understood every word. She squeezed my hand once, gently, and let go. The main course arrived. Gordon was expansive, pleased with himself, certain he had charmed the old man with his worldliness. Mr. Park ate slowly. He asked a few more questions about the deal. Gordon answered. Mrs. Park steered our conversation to safer things, art, travel, the weather in Toronto in November. I answered her pleasantly. I ate my salmon. I drank half a glass of the Riesling Gordon had ordered for the table. And when dessert came, and Mr. Park had set down his spoon, and the waiter had refilled our coffees, I looked across the table at my husband of 31 years, and I said, in Korean, in the precise, careful, grammatically immaculate Korean I had learned in a classroom in Seoul in 1984, and polished for 3 decades in the quiet of my own mind, Gordon darling. I think perhaps I should respond to a few of the things you've said this evening. I cannot describe the color that left his face. It is not a color that has a name. Mr. Park set his coffee cup down very carefully. Mrs. Park picked hers up. I continued. First, I want to thank Mr. and Mrs. Park for their hospitality and their patience. I apologize for the position you have been placed in tonight. It was not my intention to deceive anyone. But when my husband told me I would not be able to follow the conversation, I decided, for once in my life, to simply listen. Sarah Gordon said, in English, his voice cracking. I did not switch languages. I continued in Korean, addressing the Parks. My husband does not know that I spent my junior year of university at Yonsei. He does not know that I have worked as a professional translator for the past 26 years, primarily in legal and medical contexts, and that my certification with the Association of Translators and Interpreters of Ontario requires me to maintain fluency at the highest professional level. He does not know because he never asked. He was told. Once, a long time ago, and he decided it was not worth remembering. Mr. Park nodded very slightly. Mrs. Park's eyes were soft. Regarding the young woman at his office, I have known for approximately 14 months. I have documentation. Regarding the offshore structures and the numbered Ontario Corporation, I should mention that 2 years ago I became concerned about certain remittances and engaged my own forensic accountant, who is a former colleague of the one my husband uses. I have copies of everything. The papers I signed were signed under conditions that my attorney informs me may constitute undue influence, and the transfers into the numbered company will not survive a motion for disclosure in family court. The Cayman account, in particular, is going to be very difficult for my husband to explain to the Canada Revenue Agency. I paused. I took a sip of my coffee. As for Palm Springs, I wish him well. I suspect Brianna will find retirement there considerably less comfortable than he has promised her, once the dust settles. I turned to Gordon. I switched to English. My voice was very calm. I filed the petition this morning, Gordon. My lawyer is Margaret Chen at Torkin Mains. You'll be served on Monday. The locks on the Oakville house were changed at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Your things are in boxes in the garage. I suggest you find somewhere else to sleep tonight. Gordon's mouth opened. No sound came out. Mr. Park spoke then, in English, slowly and with great dignity. Mr. Lindstrom, I have been in business for 42 years. In that time, I have learned that how a man speaks about his wife, when he thinks she cannot hear him, is the most accurate measure of his character I have ever found. I will not be entering into any arrangement with your firm. I will also, as a courtesy, be sharing my observations with several of my colleagues who I believe you have been courting for similar deals. I think you will find the next few months of your professional life considerably less busy than you had anticipated. He turned to me. Mrs. Lindstrom, my wife would like to invite you to our hotel suite tomorrow morning for coffee. We have some things to discuss, which I believe will be of great interest to you. I inclined my head, the correct depth. I would be honored. Mrs. Park reached across and squeezed my hand again, and this time she did not let go for a long moment. Gordon sat there, my husband of 31 years, as still and as small as I have ever seen him. The waiter came. Mr. Park asked for the bill. He insisted on paying. Gordon did not argue. He could not speak. I stood up. I smoothed the green dress, the one with the sleeves. I picked up my handbag. I thanked Mr. and Mrs. Park in Korean for a lovely evening. I walked out of the dining room through the polished lobby of the Shangri-La onto the cold, bright sidewalk of University Avenue, and I hailed a cab, and I went home to the house I had lived in for 26 years, and I let myself in with the new key, and I sat down at my kitchen table, and I cried for about 10 minutes, and then I stopped. I made myself a cup of tea. Red Rose. The same tea I'd been drinking since I was 19 years old. The divorce took 14 months. Margaret Chen was, as I had hoped, very good at her job. The forensic accountant had been thorough. The numbered Ontario Corporation was unwound under court supervision. The commercial properties were appraised and divided. The Cayman account became a matter of discussion with the CRA, and I was, on the advice of my own tax counsel, cooperative and forthright about what I had known and when I had known it, which was, conveniently, not very much until quite recently. Gordon's professional life did indeed become considerably less busy. 3 of the major cross-Pacific deals he had been courting quietly evaporated within 6 weeks of the Shangri-La dinner. Mr. Park, as he had promised, had spoken to his colleagues. Toronto is a small city when you need it to be. Brianna left him in February. She had believed, apparently, that there would be considerably more money. There was, it turned out, considerably less. In the end, I received the Oakville house free and clear, 53% of the remaining marital assets after the forensic accounting was complete, and a lump sum settlement that reflected, as Margaret put it, the court's displeasure with my husband's creative bookkeeping. I was 64 when the papers were finalized. I was not rich. I was comfortable. I was, for the first time in 3 decades, the sole author of my own calendar. Mrs. Park and I had coffee the morning after the dinner, as her husband had proposed. She apologized again for the position I had been placed in. I apologized for the deception. We both agreed there was no deception, really, only silence, and silence is not a lie. It is only the absence of a truth someone never asked for. Before I left, she gave me her card and told me that her museum foundation in Seoul had been looking for a consultant to oversee English and French translations of their upcoming exhibition catalog, a major retrospective touring to the Art Gallery of Ontario the following year, and would I be interested in a conversation? I was interested. That contract led to 2 more. I spent 3 weeks in Seoul the following spring, my first return in nearly 40 years. The city had grown up without me. I cried on the subway one morning between Sinchon and Hongik University, quietly, for a young woman who had once walked those streets and promised herself she would remember everything. She had. She just hadn't known who she was remembering it for. My daughter flew out to meet me for the 2nd week. We ate tteokbokki at a stall in Myeongdong. I ordered in Korean. She watched me, her mother, this woman she thought she knew, and she laughed and said, "Mum, you're incredible." And I said, "I'm just late. I am 65 now. I still live in the Oakville house. I have a golden retriever named Barley who is far too spoiled. I consult on 4 or 5 major translation projects a year, which is exactly as much work as I want. My daughter and her husband had their first child last spring, a little girl they named Margaret, after my lawyer, which I found both funny and deeply moving. I visit them in Vancouver every 2 months. Gordon, I am told, moved to a smaller condominium in Mississauga. He no longer practices. Brianna is long gone. I saw him once, 18 months after the divorce, at a Loblaws in Port Credit. He was standing in the cereal aisle. He looked smaller than I remembered. He looked, honestly, quite old. He saw me. He opened his mouth. I nodded politely, the way you nod at a stranger who you think might have mistaken you for someone else, and I kept walking. I was buying blueberries. They were on sale. I want to say something to whoever is listening to this. If you are a woman of a certain age, and you have spent a long time being the person your husband expects you to be, and you have a drawer somewhere in the back of your mind where you have folded away a part of yourself because it was easier than being corrected or dismissed or laughed at, I want you to know something. That drawer is still there. The thing inside it has not withered. Languages do not die when they go unspoken. Dreams do not die when they go untended. Women do not die when they go unseen. Silence is not weakness. Silence sometimes is patience. Silence is a woman listening very carefully to what her life is telling her, and deciding in her own time, in her own way, what she is going to do about it. I listened for 31 years. Then I spoke. And I have never once regretted the order in which I did those things.